Hello. Today is my last day officially doing this horrible fucking job I've been doing. A thing about this job is that it has led me to fantasize a lot. And like, I always think of Freud. I've been thinking about Freud a lot this summer because I've been reading him, and because he's always in the back of my mind, I guess. Like, since you know how you read something and you can't really avoid the effect that it has on you. So I've been, in this sort of very Freudian vibe this summer, and I think a lot about something he said, but it's something about he's talking about daydreaming. I think it's an essay on daydreaming and how daydreaming are notably unsatisfied or unfulfilled wishes, and that is most certainly the case, Mr. Freud. I've been daydreaming a lot because I hate this job, so I'm thinking about like my ideal job, which at the moment is only ideal because it's kind of like the most accessible thing that I have to my mind, which is teaching. And in particular, I've been having, and I've been having means like as of this morning, I've been having these thoughts about me teaching a class. So I'm going to tell you all about that class. So if I taught a class, it would be called applied hermeneutics, because I think, well, hermeneutics, I probably mentioned it in other videos, but it's just sort of this philosophy of interpretation and understanding. It is created from, kind of, it starts with the Bible interpretation. That's really like the birth of this tradition, let's say, because obviously there's a lot of different ways to interpret biblical texts and religious texts, and it depends on the history and translations and context. So just kind of looking mainly at that, and how to do translation work as well. So hermeneutics is very tied to linguistics in that sense, which is a cool thing. But then it just kind of develops into other areas of life, and in particular, I think about it through Gadamer, because that's the hermeneutics guy I've studied the most, and he is this German, thinker, philosopher, person who wrote a lot about hermeneutics, and especially like this book, Truth and Method, where he just really, well, he talks about everything and then just relates it back to how, like, well, the kind of what truth is, what we're looking for with hermeneutics. He does say that understanding is not ever a complete task, because it just kind of keeps on going. And like there's this, I think there's this inaccessibility to truth and understanding that is key to participating in hermeneutics and to interpreting anything. It's the fact that you will never get the complete understanding, because one, you're not in the other person's mind, or you're not in the object's space of being, I guess. So you cannot really access to entirely understand what something is. You kind of have to be that thing, and or be that person, or be that being, and you cannot be anything other than yourself, at least up until up to my knowledge. I have tried. And so since you cannot really escape like the beingness of your being, which is kind of like this Heideggerian language, who is another guy who really um, inspires Gadamer, then there's just a limit to the things that you can understand. And so, yeah, that for a little like hermeneutical parentheses. But another thing that he does in the Truth and Method book is that he connects it with aesthetics a lot in order to do a hermeneutic analysis. If hermeneutics is the philosophy of interpretation, then says like, okay, let's see how does art interpretation work. Let's see how is what is happening when I encounter a piece of art. How am I understanding it? How am I like connecting with it? How do I understand the intentions of the artist? Um, what's going on there? And in this book in particular, he's kind of criticizing Kant a lot, because Kant is another big guy. Maybe you've heard this name. He has this notion of aesthetics which is very subjective. So basically he says that when you encounter a piece of art, it's just kind of you putting all the input into that piece. So let's say like you meet a piece, and then you're like, okay, what it's giving green and blue, and like all these whatever it's giving, but like it's all kind of happening in my mind. And in particular in Kant's notion of taste, if I say like, oh, this thing is beautiful or this thing is ugly, um it all kind of like boils down to a personal take, and that's just kind of a very subjective like experience. And then the sort of discussions that that would lead to with another person, just stay with the subject. So it's kind of like if I'm meeting someone, I'm like, that's pretty, and then this other person says like, well, that's ugly. It all kind of boils down to whatever we give the piece. Like the piece is not really giving us any input on it. It's all up to our subjectivities, I guess. And Gadamer is like, no, that's not the case, because you, in order first of all to get all that input, like the piece has to exist and give you that input in order for you to have an opinion on it. So that's already like almost a conversation that is happening between me and that is telling us, oh, okay, I have a certain feeling about this. And then it's like, yeah, and I'm giving you a certain input on it. Secondly, there's obviously the effects of history, like when was I born? When was this born? Like when we were created, what space we find each other in the moment. Like there's just so many little aspects that are affecting just like that taste right now, that boiling it down to only my opinion and only my subjectivity is just like so reductive, you know? I feel like I agree, you know, I like, who are you but just all these influences, all these historical influences that have been around you. And but that's one example of how art is very useful in the process of a hermeneutic analysis, because it is a matter of like, okay, what is going on when I encounter this art? How am I reading it? How is it reading me in a sense? How is this encounter creating new knowledge that will be passed on in the future, and how does this encounter inform anything about who I am or what this piece represents? That's all a matter of interpretation, you know, and it becomes very useful. So that's why the course I'm thinking about, again, like the applied hermeneutics or the applications of hermeneutics or something like that, um I'm just kind of borrowing from applied ethics, I guess, because you know ethics is kind of like the study of morality and, you know, good and evil and how one should act in society and all these things. So then when we think about applied ethics, we just put real life scenarios, and it's like, okay, trolley problem, do you kill four doctors or do you kill your mom? Like choose now, or like the world's gonna end, kind of thing. So obviously, like, hopefully this applied hermeneutics course won't be as rash as most applied ethics classes. No shame to ethics professors, but I just cannot. I like all the expertise to be in your shoes, guys. um but I mean, like, okay, can I just do a little parenthesis? Like, it's just so hard doing an applied ethics class, because like that's just, in most cases, you don't have to take those decisions in that like speed, or with such little information. Like I find that their examples are really um reductive sometimes. And hopefully my class won't be that way, and I guess that's a good note to keep in mind for when I make this class, not to make examples that are unrealistic, because ideally we'll take this knowledge and you know, actually apply it outside, which is probably what most of these courses are trying to do anyway. But close parentheses. It would ideally obviously start like with an explanation of what hermeneutics is, and just based on my background, I would most likely be pulling that out from Gadamer and maybe some Heidegger too, in order to give context to this piece. Even though, for me, the hermeneutics guy is truly Gadamer, and that's just like a virtue of my training. I don't know that it was my choice that much, but you know. And then it would really be like reading other texts, and I guess just kind of applying that hermeneutic knowledge and seeing like, okay, how do we, I guess it would be a class of interpretation of text, which would be maybe closer to a literature class. But I mean, that could be a cool way of doing it, you know, reading a lot of literature and then just seeing how do we understand, just kind of seeing the biographies of the authors as well, and trying to see the little universe from which this piece or these cluster of pieces come from, and then saying, okay, do we see the direction that it's going through? What do we think was really like the meanings that were going through this person's head? Do we think that like whatever we got was intended by the author? Because that's something that Gallagher also puts a lot of emphasis in, that when we go and read a piece, we usually have a kind of an idea already in our minds of what we want to read, instead of really focusing on what is being said to us. um I think it's a rare number of occasions when we actually pick up a book and we have no idea what it's really about. Especially nowadays, the books have a little information in the back, and they're recommended by somebody, or we read them for a class, or there's just, or it's like your mom read it and then she tells you like this is a great book because of this and that. Like go ahead and read it. And and that's usually great because like we trust the taste of the people around us usually, but that might also be because it's close to our taste, and it might be more of a familiarity thing rather than a you know hierarchy of tastes kind of thing. But with that piece aside, um it gets rare, like the number of occasions when we actually are able to encounter a piece purely for what it is, or at least just try to get to know the piece rather than assume that we kind of already know it. um I think it's the same with like many shows that we play in the background. Like the shows are just kind of playing and we just kind of like have an idea of what's going on, and we just stick with that throughout the whole plot, and that's when we're able to really summarize most things in one or two sentences, or say like, oh, this was really good or this was really bad. And then it's hard to like get more out of it unless you're doing kind of an academic study, and then you really sit down and try to piece it together. And even then you might go in as an academic trying to do a study on something with the theory that you already have in mind, and just trying to look for every application in that to the thing that you're reading, which is something that I think the students do all the time. It's like, oh, I'm gonna do this like study on like this theory on this, right? Like, I don't know, Hume's theory of taste on this thing, blah blah blah. And then like you just go into a situation and then you're like, well, this is where the theory applies because A, B, and C. But you kind of already go in like what's leading you is the theory that you're studying more than I got a text. What's leading you is the theory that you're studying rather than the piece itself informing where your research should go, which is I think what they tell you mostly to do that's what they tell you to do mostly in research, like let the piece guide the study rather than like your study guide the piece. But that's not we don't always have time for that, so I understand how it's kind of difficult to stick to that. But in hermeneutics that's what they would ask you to do at least. So that's why that would be my idea class. And yeah, I think it seems like it would be mostly a literature class right now. It's very much in the ideas phase. I haven't even started my PhD yet, so it's not like I can even think about doing my own class right now. But I think I should at least keep a record of these ideas that I'm having for whenever the time comes that I actually have to start devising something on my own, and I can have a couple things to show and say like, okay, this is what I would do, what do we think, and then I can start working on something. But yeah, I did this painting kind of because of that the other day. It says great ideas. It's not a painting, that's marker, but it's on a canvas, so it feels like a painting. I hope to see you all enrolling in my applied hermeneutics class.